Awakening in a room that should be one of familiarity, a place of comfort and tranquility that you can always rely on to give you relaxation, to ease the anxiety away when you wake up, knowing you are safe. However, this nightmare is real. Around you lies decayed walls slowly polluting as time passes. The furniture is covered in putrid mold that radiates a foul stench. The apartment itself is corrupted in this manifestation that is derived from a bad dream that you wake up from, screaming as your heart palpitates steadily. Discomforting screams echo around the interior of the apartment as they ricochet wall to wall. A sickening red imagery obscures your vision from seeing clearly, questioning yourself if what you see is truly real. And, as you bear witness one last time to your room that was once a place of safety, it is now a place of confinement. Witnessing what could only be straight out of a horror story as the ominous figure clawing its way out of the wall, revealing itself to be an evil entity, hell-bent on killing you. With your last sight, seeing this otherworldly being as the last thing you see before your life flashes before your eyes. Awakening from his slumber, an everyday man sits atop the edge of his bed, pondering to himself the dream he just had. However, like any dream, he brushes it off as not real and merely just a nightmarish delusion. Henry Townshend, a resident of the city of South Ashfield, a couple of years ago, moved into the apartment complex, South Ashfield Heights, staying comfortably in room 302. From what can be gathered and collected about Henry over the years, he grew up with a seemingly normal life. Because of this, Henry's seen as calm, quiet, and introverted, reserved to himself much of the time, having little to no interaction amongst the attendants of South Ashfield Heights, with those who know of him only in passing. Exploring the apartment, little relics and hints of nostalgia lie scattered, giving a bit more of an idea of Henry's background. In his bedroom, Henry comments on his memories of his time spent in the town of Silent Hill, which he visited as a child and recently as an adult. Henry reminisces about taking photos of Balkan Church, the Lakeside Lighthouse, and a mural of Toluca Lake, which he received as a gift from Frank Sunderland. Furthering this interest in photography is Henry's essentials that are deemed as imperative to his profession. On his desk lays scattered miscellaneous items such as a scrapbook, a pen, books, and a leather portfolio. Henry comments that he has a passion for collecting information, which he keeps organized not only in a scrapbook but also in magazines, books, and newspaper clippings. In his living room, Henry has photos from his youth, which he comments about his childhood being unsentimental, alluding to his prior years as uneventful or not as significant, seemingly normal. This hint of normalcy, however, would not be regarded as an afterthought, as Henry's day-to-day life of being quaint and content with such simplicity would change drastically. As he walks to his front door, Henry finds that it's been completely shut and locked, shackled from top to bottom with chains of metal, preventing him from leaving his humble abode. However, this isn't much of a shock, as Henry states he has been locked in this room for 5 days. According to him, not only has he been held hostage in the confines of his once safe space of his home, but the TV and telephone have been completely cut off, the windows have been completely shut, and no matter how high he screams, no one can hear his cries for help. Curiously, one of the oddities to appear out of this bizarre situation is a sentence that is written in red on the door, which states, "Don't go out, Walter." While scrutinizing the door with the intent of trying to find some means of escape, Henry suddenly hears a loud thud on the other side of the door. Curious, Henry peers into the peephole to look outside, only to be met with his next-door neighbor from room 301, Eileen Galvin. Eileen is seen gathering a fallen grocery item that fell out of her bag, which is for an upcoming party that she's preparing to go to. However, unbeknownst to her and seen by Henry, are 15 ominous red-colored hands that are planted on the wall across from him in the hallway. As Henry stands afar from the door, he finds a mysterious note on the ground. On this note, it has someone, seemingly a child, asking why their mom doesn't wake up. With the situation becoming dire, Henry continues his search in his apartment for any sign that could indicate a clue to escaping from room 302. Gazing outside into the city streets and bustling life of South Ashfield, with the everyday folk going about their daily lives, Henry notices a woman who's standing idle as she descends into a stairwell into the subway station. While looking intently into the outside world that continues without him, Henry hears a loud crash inside of his bathroom. Startled yet determined, Henry enters his bathroom to suddenly stumble upon a large, gaping hole in the wall. Henry stands baffled as how exactly something like this could happen. Nevertheless, Henry takes his chances, as this is seen as potentially an escape from room 302. As he slowly crawls through the claustrophobic hole that seemingly grows never-ending, he inches closer to what seems to be a bright light. Henry continues his crawl until finally reaching the end of the tunnel. As he does, Henry awakens while crouched on a moving escalator. Familiarizing himself with the dark and ominously quiet atmosphere, Henry gathers the courage to explore the liminal halls of the subway station, only to find the girl he previously saw far from his apartment window standing in the hallway. The girl, shocked yet offended by Henry's lack of acknowledgement of her identity, shows a bit of entitlement, but introduces herself as Cynthia Velasquez. Cynthia refers to their situation as a dream, which Henry finds hard to believe. As they continue to get familiar with each other, Cynthia attempts to flirtatiously seduce Henry into helping her escape from this dream. By obliging with her request, Cynthia would pull a special favor for Henry, if he does. According to the official documentation, another Crimson Tomb, which delves into the major cast of characters' biographies, as well as expanding upon the world's lore and mythology, sees further elaboration exploring Cynthia Velasquez's backstory. About 16 years ago, Cynthia meets a man referred to as him in the same subway station. Before their meeting, however, Cynthia was only 13 years old, with the occupation as a junior high school student, who would, unintentionally, pass by the man sitting from afar. Whether she was with her friends from school or alone, she would always see him, often hanging around the subway station by himself. She recounts seeing the man staying in the subway station all night in worn-out clothes and in a sleeping bag, but never approaching him and leaving him be. One day, the man would approach Cynthia, who, much to her shock, was curious what he had to say. The man continued to ask her a very personal question, stating which school was she going to. Shocked, but surprisingly compliant, she tells the man that she went to South Ashfield Junior High School. While coming off as friendly, she still sets her boundaries as she isn't foolish enough to talk to strangers haphazardly, as she still doesn't know his intentions. The man then makes an odd statement about an apartment, specifically room 302. As he continues to ramble, Cynthia's friends come to her rescue and tell her to distance herself from the stranger as they see him as a creep and a piece of crap, telling her to leave him alone and that they should get going. However, Cynthia indulges in the mysterious man's questions and continues to comply with him. She then tells the man he looks handsome and where he is from. The man replies that he is from Silent Hill. Her friends, now growing frustrated and resilient against her actions, once again drag Cynthia away from the man. The man then shouts out Cynthia's name, much to her shock. This is enough to get her attention, and much to her friends' dismay, Cynthia forces herself away from her friends and confronts the man. She then puts her right hand on his cheek, telling him that while she told him he was handsome, she doesn't want him to misinterpret that she may find him attractive, giving false expectations. She then continues to relentlessly lambast the man by telling him his clothes are filthy, he smells of odor, and this isn't what a type of girl like her is into. Finishing off her insults, she then questions him about how he knows her, to which he reveals he heard of her name 10 years ago. Shocked and disgusted, Cynthia grows grossed out by the knowledge of now knowing he has been eavesdropping on her for the past 10 years since she was 3 years old. Cynthia then regroups with her friends as they hurry down the stairs onto the subway platform. As they get enough distance away from the man, Cynthia comments on how it's just not her day, and it's just her luck to meet a creep like the man she met. However, to reconcile and ease the creepy encounter, she tells her friends they should all go to a nightclub together. Her friends, however, groan and show disdain for her decision as they unanimously agree that Cynthia will get caught again. However, Cynthia tells them that she'll be fine, as they won't notice if it's her. As they get acquainted and roam the subway station, Cynthia suddenly starts to feel pain in her stomach and feels the need to vomit, running into the restroom. As Henry waits for Cynthia after a long period of time, he is then confronted unexpectedly by a mutilated, decayed dog, as it's thrown out of the restroom. Close by are other dog-like monsters, grouping around the incapacitated monster to consume its flesh. The monster, Sniffer Dog, is a canine-like creature that appears in dirty, leathery, decayed-like skin that exposes much of their flesh, with burned, mutilated patches that appear all over the body. When hearing a loud, audible sound, they are immediately alerted to their prey and will echo a loud snarl before hunting them down. They typically appear in a pack, either as males or females. Interestingly, the male variant is notable in its visible eyes, ears, and green-like fur, with an elongated red tongue, while the female variant is noticeable with missing its eyes and ears, while coated with a brown-like fur with an elongated purple tongue. As their name implies, the Sniffer Dog is usually seen in either groups or alone, feasting upon its prey, which is typically depicted as a monster's corpse. They consume their food by using their long, slithery tongue by slurping and sucking its blood to consume as food. They are notable in their agility, as they're seen as fast predators that can outrun their prey, as they have prominent speed and a powerful lunge. Because they are agile, especially susceptible to loud noises, walking passively and far from the Sniffer Dog will not alert them. The Sniffer Dog is symbolic of Walter Sullivan's disdain for animals, as he found animals intimidating after a bad experience with one when he was much younger. This fear would be manifested when Walter would visit a pet shop in his youth and was nearly bitten by a dog, scarring the poor child. After his encounter with the Sniffer Dog, Henry immediately runs into the restroom to check in on Cynthia, assuming she was harmed by the Sniffer Dog, as had previously come out of the restroom. However, much to his misfortune, Henry finds Cynthia completely gone. Close by, he suddenly finds another large gaping hole that he had previously found in his restroom in his apartment. With no other option, and out of desperation for Cynthia's safety, Henry ventures into the hole once more in hopes of finding her. As Henry enters the hole, he finds himself awakening in his bedroom. Appalled by the events that transpired previously, Henry questions whether what he experienced alongside the woman he met was yet another dream. Uncertain and lost in thought over the ambiguous nature, Henry continues forth into his living room in his apartment. While here, he glances towards the wall where his furniture seems to have slightly moved, partially, as if someone had moved it recently. As Henry moves the furniture, a handgun lies on the floor and another carved out hole in the wall. While startled, Henry musters the courage to look into the hole to see what's on the other side. As he looks into the hole, he finds his next door neighbor, Eileen Galvin, sitting atop her bed as she looks for her broom. Suddenly, Henry hears a loud ringing from behind him that appears to originate from his bedroom. As he relocates to his room to answer the telephone, Henry hears Cynthia pleading with him to save her, as she is still trapped in the subway station. She tells him to find a token to reach her position. With no time to lose, Henry decides to use the hole in his restroom as a means to traverse these portals to these other worlds. Once back in the subway world, Henry stumbles upon a mannequin that bears a very similar appearance to Cynthia. On the mannequin's hand, as it reaches out to Henry, it holds the Lynch Street line coin, which Henry will need to use to enter the stairwell to the bottom floor of the ascending platform in the subway station. As Henry makes his descent to the bottom, Henry suddenly encounters a sight that can only be described as paranormal. To be more specific, a ghost. Ghosts are one of the recurring enemies in-game, much like the monsters, that appear in subsequent areas that Henry frequents over the course of his journey throughout Walter's other worlds. The ghosts are entities that possess strong physical prowess, as they cannot be killed as they are effectively deceased. Much of their behavior shows the ghostly entities appear at random, phasing through the walls, leaving behind a large, massive sticky, gooey-like flesh that protrudes as they climb out to reach their victim to kill them. To inflict harm on Henry, they don't necessarily have to physically harm him through violent attacks, but rather, merely being in his presence makes Henry susceptible to their overwhelming influence, leaving him with intense headaches, which depletes his health, leaving him vulnerable. To counter this threat, Henry must equip a Saint Medallion, negating the ghost's influence, which leaves Henry void of experiencing health depletion. However, this still leaves Henry vulnerable and not necessarily void of physical attacks, as he can still be dealt damage if left open. Furthermore, the Saint Medallion is only a temporary solution, as the amulet will break after prolonged use. With the handgun, Henry can use a silver bullet to fire at ghosts, leaving them immobile for a short time frame. However, these are rare to find and hard to come by. The candles can be placed in an environment where ghosts are nearby, which repels them from circulating onto their prey. Although, much like the Saint Medallion, the candle will expire after a short period of time. Lastly, the most effective means of incapacitating a ghost effectively, without repercussions, is a Sword of Obedience. This sword is seen as a long-term solution to the ghost, as it can be used to put down a ghost for good. As Henry implants the sword into the ghost on the ground, this leaves the ghost completely immobile and unable to move. However, much like the silver bullet, there are very few of these swords that can be used. The first ghost that Henry encounters is named Jimmy Stone, a cultist who served under the religious cult, the Order, who was positioned as a priest and executioner under the Valtiel sector. Jimmy Stone dates back to the early history of the town of Silent Hill, more specifically, under his ancestor, Reverend Stone. Reverend Stone, while not serving under the position of the role in the Order, rather as a Christian preacher in the communal church in Silent Hill, Maine, during the 1860s, would indirectly influence the practices and teachings of Jimmy Stone, albeit for more nefarious and immoral purposes. As a member serving under the Valtiel sector, Jimmy Stone served under Valtiel, among those in his faction who believed that Valtiel was closer to God, as he served as a scribe. Valtiel played the important role of ensuring the birth of God, delivered from its surrogate mother to rebirth the world under a new paradise. As the Valtiel sector served as not only priests but executioners, this would see these ritualistic practices and performances conducted by Jimmy Stone. The executioners would wear red triangular hoods with white ceremonial robes, modeled after Valtiel. This would earn Jimmy Stone the nickname the Red Devil. On one fateful day, a young Walter would be groomed and influenced under Jimmy Stone's accomplice, George Roston, to conduct the 21 Sacraments ritual, which would inadvertently backfire for both Jimmy and George, because George influenced Walter to be indoctrinated under the practices and beliefs of Valtiel. He would manifest this and carry out his first murder, Jimmy Stone, by sneaking up behind him and shooting him with a handgun behind the head. Because of the 21 Sacraments ritual commenced accordingly, this would see Jimmy Stone become Walter's first of many victims to fall prey to him and be damned to becoming a ghost wandering his other worlds forever. Close by is another one of the ghosts that was murdered by Walter as his 14th victim, named Toby Archbolt, a priest who conducted under the Holy Mother sector of the Order. Toby conducted much of his operations in the Silent Hill Wish House orphanage. Upon the aftermath of the deaths of both Jimmy Stone and George Roston, this would prove detrimental to the Valtiel sector, as their influence under the Order continued to dissolve. As this would be damaging to the Order, Toby decided in a fit of desperation to preserve the Holy Mother sector by increasing its influence under legal business practices by selling marijuana in secret. Because of the success of his illegal operations, Toby would preserve and reopen Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage, getting monumental praise and respect amongst his peers. This feat would not go unnoticed and would see Toby elected as one of the members of the city council for Silent Hill due to his contributions. However, this short time of glory would see Toby see time catch up with him, as he would last be seen deceased after a visit to Mexico, as his cause of death would be due to being pushed off a cliff by Walter Sullivan. After Henry's encounters with both Jimmy Stone and Toby Archbolt, he would continue his descent to the lower platforms of the subway world. As Henry makes it to the subway platform, he finds a scared Cynthia stuck inside one of the subway cars, pleading to him to save her. Without hesitation, Henry makes his way to the first subway car to open the locked doors for Cynthia so she can escape. Once they reconvene, both Henry and Cynthia venture through the surrounding maze-like subway cars to reach the other side of the subway platform. As they both reach the opposite end, Henry and Cynthia both enter a nearby door, only to see Cynthia absent and nowhere to be found once again. Henry, left perplexed, decides to continue to explore the subway world in hopes of once again finding Cynthia. Henry presses forward by traversing the underground tunnels to reach another lower subway platform. Once here, Henry hears Cynthia's voice, telling him that she found an exit and to find her at the turnstile. However, she tells him to hurry as she exclaims in a fit of panic that he's here. Rushing to Cynthia, Henry enters a prolonged flight of moving escalators to be met with a new monster called the Wallman. A lanky, flesh-like humanoid monster attached to the wall at its waist sees the Wallman stuck and immobile, incapable of movement. However, as their upper torso has control and freedom, they are still a threat that can be brutal if caught in their crosshairs. While its attack is simplistic, only having the ability to swing both of its arms, its attack is powerful enough to knock down Henry in just one swing. Furthering their physical attacks is their intelligence, as they can camouflage themselves in walls, surprising their victim by attacking them suddenly. The Wallman can be symbolic of Walter's fear of isolation, confinement, and claustrophobia. There are many themes seen throughout the story that force Henry to enter tight and linear spaces to make him comfortable with being uncomfortable, such as crawling through tight, linear holes, looking into holes, or being stuck inside his own apartment. Walter, seen as having nowhere to go but to survive for much of his life without a home, can see the places surrounding him as hostile and lacking the hospitality he desired. After ascending the escalator, Henry finds himself back at the turnstile. As he arrives, he finds miscellaneous makeup accessories that are assumed to be Cynthia's, with puddles of blood nearby in the next door room. Before entering, Henry receives the Temptation placard, one of the 4 placards he will collect. Entering the room, Henry finds a bloodbath all over, from top to bottom, with the center of the floor remaining Cynthia as she slowly dies. Henry holds Cynthia intimately to console her as she laments to him with her dying words that this is just a dream, and that she had too much to drink last night. Respecting her wishes, Henry goes along with Cynthia's delusions so she doesn't have to bear the burden of the reality happening before her. Cynthia laments that she never got to give Henry that special favor for him. Cynthia then caresses Henry's cheek, telling him that she feels like she is dying. Henry holds her hand tightly, consoling her that it's just a dream. As Cynthia dies, a marked bloodstain is revealed on her left breast with the words 16 out of 21, confirming Cynthia as Walter's 16th victim. However, this would be unbeknownst to Henry until much later as to what these markings truly mean. Henry awakens in his bedroom of his apartment to hear a loud, blaring sound from an ambulance radiating outside of his window. Curious about what is happening, Henry peers into the outside world to find the ambulance parked outside of the subway entrance, alluding to Cynthia's body being discovered. Henry then looks outside his front door where he finds the superintendent, Frank Sunderland, using a broom to clean the hallways on the 3rd floor. The wall with the numerous handprints then show a new bloodstained handprint, implying this to be Cynthia's, as there's now 16. As the name implies, Frank Sunderland is the father of James Sunderland, the previous protagonist of Silent Hill 2. Frank Sunderland is known amongst the residents of South Ashfield Heights as the superintendent, as South Ashfield Heights has been around for about 40 years before the events of Silent Hill 4. It's implied that Frank Sunderland has been around as its superintendent since then. Around this time, Frank would unexpectedly discover a baby crying in room 302, left abandoned by his parents. This baby would be Walter Sullivan. Because Frank knew of the previous occupants, Walter's parents, he was left in ambiguity as to the reasons Walter was left abandoned by his parents, leading him to speculate that they had financial troubles or got into some form of danger. Regardless of the reason, the outcome was that Walter was disowned by his own parents, leaving Frank to give Walter to St. Jerome Hospital, a nearby hospital in South Ashfield. Due to his conscience and empathy, Frank kept Walter's umbilical cord in his room for over 34 years, seeing it as too precious to throw out. A few years after this incident, Frank would randomly see a little boy come by South Ashfield Heights on occasion to specifically visit room 302. However, one day he would abruptly stop showing up at the apartment building for unknown reasons. Eventually, similar events would transpire, as an older Frank Sunderland would find an adult man wearing a coat visiting room 302, leading him to believe this was the same little boy, but now all grown up. This would, much like years prior, stop one day, but Frank would still have dreams of the man crying and calling to his mother outside of room 302. Henry continues his journey in trying to find a way to escape room 302 by using the hole to travel to Walter's other worlds. Upon going through the hole, Henry finds himself in a forest world known as Silent Hill Woods. Wandering into the dark, foreboding forest, Henry soon encounters a massive swarm of monstrous moth-like bat creatures called the Hummer. These agile creatures are small in its size, appearing as an amalgamation of a bird, presumably a hummingbird, as the name implies, and a bat, as they encompass a long, needle-like beak whilst having black wings to fly around. They tend to make loud, humming, buzz-like sounds when alerted to someone's presence. While not extremely hostile in its attacks, they're rather seen as irritating when Henry is overwhelmed in large groups, swarming Henry by dealing only minor damage. They can, however, be easily disposed of with a melee weapon or firearm with just one attack, resulting in them falling onto the ground. Because the Hummer has similarities to a hummingbird and a bat, in juxtaposition to their design, they likely can be symbolic of peace, yet also death. According to Native Americans, they depict the hummingbird as a symbol of love, peace, and joy. In conjunction with this belief, the natives also saw bats as a symbol of shamanic death and rebirth. It's believed that shamans who undergo ritualistic death confront their fears in self-transformation. This juxtaposition with the hummingbird and bat theme with the Hummer could encompass Walter's goal in achieving peace and joy through the completion of the 21 Sacraments ritual, proposed to bring him close to his mother, which is what he wanted for his whole life. However, in undergoing this process, this transformed Walter into malicious, sadistic, and sociopathic serial killer who killed innocent people for his selfish desires, seeing him also needing to die to be reborn to achieve this goal. Furthering his path along the lonely, ambient woods, Henry finds a parked car with its engine light still active, with the door left wide open and the driver nowhere to be found. Atop the driver's seat, Henry finds a note left by the driver. In this note, The driver mentions that it's been a while since they've driven to Silent Hill, in an effort to hopefully one day meet the devil. Before ending his thoughts, he mentions that whenever he comes to a cool place, much like Silent Hill, he always gets thirsty, leaving with his signature, Jasper Gein. After reading the note, Henry finds a man nearby, sitting on top of a rock, pondering to himself. When interacting, the man, Jasper Gein, talks with a speech impediment. Jasper mentions to Henry that there was previously another nosy guy who was looking for a stone, but Jasper states that he found it first. Jasper then mentions an ancient relic that was possessed by the Native Americans, which they called the Nakihona. According to Jasper, the natives used this relic in a ritualistic ceremony to talk to their ancestors. Jasper refers to these group of guys, the Order, using this item for the Mother Stone. He continues to inform Henry that the Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage was housed by a cult that collected orphans, and, as he puts it, did things to them, implying physical abuse as a means to indoctrinate their religious cult-like practices into the children. According to the Another Crimson Tomb documentation, it reveals that 10 years ago, Jasper Gein was still a high school student at the time, who was previously friends of two boys named Bobby Randolph and Sein Martin. Bobby and Sein were interested in the occult and ritualistic practices of the Order, mostly associated with the conjuring of God, whom they perceived as the devil. Jasper, hesitantly, tells Bobby with a shaky voice that the devil isn't his friend. Upon being peer pressured by his friends to join them in meeting the devil, suddenly, Bobby is heard screaming violently. Shortly after, Sein is also heard screaming violently. As they scream to Jasper to help them, they are nowhere to be heard or seen. Suddenly, Jasper hears a voice from a man calling to him. The man taunts him, telling him if he's still hiding and that he came here to see him. Without a second thought, Jasper immediately ran away as far as he could from the man, until he stopped at a drugstore for safety. As he finds solace in his surroundings, he turns back to see that the man was nowhere to be found and was completely gone. After this incident, Bobby and Sein were reported missing. The aftermath of this incident will later reveal that Bobby Randolph and Sein Martin would be strangled to death by Walter Sullivan, and have both of their hearts removed, respectively. Both of their corpses will later be found on a college campus in Pleasant River. Bobby Randolph would be Walter's second victim, and Sein Martin would be Walter's third victim. After talking to Jasper, Henry encounters the Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage. On paper, the Wish House Orphanage was, to society, seen as a foster care for orphans, unfortunate enough to not have parents or guardians under their care. However, the true intentions of the Wish House Orphanage would be revealed, as, according to investigative journalist Joesph Schrieber, who published an article titled Joseph's Article, would reveal in his expose that on the surface level, the orphanage would provide a place of hospitality and promote a charity organization under the Silent Hill Smile Support Society to collect revenue and use the funds to help provide for the children. However, in execution, this is merely a cover-up which saw those in charge take advantage of those profits to extort them, and physically abuse the children who lived in the orphanage. If the children were foolish enough to rebel against the cult members, such as straying away from their cult practices, the adults would punish them by sending them to the water prison, where they would be further tortured through other means and imprisoned indefinitely. A woman named Mrs. Smith, who lives near Wish House Orphanage, sometimes heard children crying at night while the adults simultaneously chanted weird prayers. When Mrs. Smith complained to the staff, she was denied any access to the orphanage. Another reporter attempted to ask permission to take photos inside the Wish House Orphanage, but was also denied. At the end of Joseph's article, he states he will further his research into the Wish House Orphanage and the cult running the legal operations behind it. Upon his arrival at Wish House Orphanage, Henry returns to his apartment through the hole. Once returned, he decides to check the peephole of his front door, to be met with a worried Eileen, ringing his doorbell and banging on his door. As Eileen tries to get the attention of Henry, he yells to her, pleading to help him and get him out of his room. Much to his dismay, Eileen doesn't hear anything from the other side of the door. However, she grows suspicious of the activity that is seemingly going on in room 302. Eileen is then joined by a fellow resident in the apartment building named Richard Braintree. Eileen tells Richard that she's been hearing strange noises coming from inside room 302, and if he could look out from his window from the opposite end of the apartment building to see if there's anything weird going on inside. However, Richard states that everything looked normal from his window and asks Eileen what Henry is like, as he doesn't know much about him. Eileen admits that she only knows Henry by name and in passing, but nothing more than that. With no other option, Richard recommends they both notify the superintendent of their current situation. After this exchange, Henry travels back to the forest world to continue his search in Saltol Woods. Once exploring, Henry is then met with an ex-ghost named Steve Garland, a man who owned and ran a pet shop located in the heart of South Ashfield named Garland. Like his pet store name implies, Steve Garland had a fondness for animals as he despised humans, due to their behavior easily angering him. 26 years ago, Steve was one day going about his routine at his pet store as if it were any other normal day. However, this day in particular would leave an everlasting impression on him as he would meet a young Walter Sullivan. Minding his business, Walter would speculate and roam the pet store, only to then handle a cage with an animal inside, to which he would accidentally drop and injure the animal in the process. This enraged Steve, as he would kick out the young Walter, which left him traumatized from the experience, but also grow a fear and hatred towards animals, possibly blaming Steve because of the event. 26 years later passed. Steve Garland would once again go about his standard routine, and, as fate would have it, an older Walter Sullivan would abruptly appear at Garland's pet store. Walter would then go about brutally murdering Steve with a submachine gun, leaving him numerous bullet wounds all over his body, except the chest area, to extract his heart. As if it wasn't enough, Walter would vent his anger and lash out towards the rest of the remaining animals by killing all of them with his submachine gun. Steve Garland would be Walter's fourth victim. After his encounter with the ghost, Henry would then stumble upon a cemetery to find a little boy alone. As the little boy is about to speak, he is then interrupted by Jasper. Jasper proceeds to ramble about a prophecy that he refers to as the Third Revelation, implying something big is going to happen with the presence of the little boy, as he exclaims in excitement in a delusional state. As Jasper walks away, the little boy is seen running off. As Henry returns to Wish House Orphanage, he finds Jasper awaiting him. Jasper tells Henry that the front door of the orphanage is locked. However, he was met by a nosy guy who gave Jasper something of importance, although this isn't for free. Jasper tells Henry that if he could find him something to drink to appease his thirst, that he'd give him a blood-inscribed spade in return. Once Henry has returned to his apartment to retrieve the chocolate milk, he gives Jasper the chocolate milk in return, much to his approval. With the blood-inscribed spade acquired, Henry uses the spade on a nearby tree of arms protruding from the ground. As he digs the ground, he finds a rusty, bloody key. However, with the key in hand, Henry cannot head back to the orphanage, as he would get stuck in a loop as long as he carries the key with him. Needing to think outside the box, Henry uses the hole to travel back to his apartment to store the key in his inventory box to acquire later on. Once Henry arrives at Wish House Orphanage, he retrieves the key from his inventory box and uses the rusty bloody key to finally enter the Wish House Orphanage. Once inside, he finds the interior completely distraught and left in disarray, finding miscellaneous children's drawings scattered across the floors, furniture left in a messy and unkempt state, and the entirety of the orphanage left abandoned. Elsewhere on the floor, Henry finds a memo that notes about the third sign, which states that one must return to the source through sin's temptation under the watchful eye of the demon, wandering alone into chaos. After finishing the note, Henry hears screaming from Jasper inside the room. Before entering, Henry collects the source placard. Once inside, Henry finds a disturbing scene of Jasper's entire body burning in fire as his skin begins to scorch and become mutilated. As Jasper is burning, he uses a nearby candlestick from the altar to brutally carve into his chest 17 out of 21, resulting in Jasper as Walter's 17th victim. Before dying, Jasper says he finally met who he claims is the devil. Upon awakening in his bedroom once again, Henry is awoken by the radio in his apartment with commentary on the recent murder of Jasper Gein. The police conduct an investigation that leads them to believe that this is connected to the Walter Sullivan case from 10 years ago. Moments later, Henry hears the ring of his doorbell coming from his front door. Looking through the peephole, he finds Frank Sunderland worried about him as he asks if he's in his apartment. In desperation, Henry pleads to Frank to help him as he laments that something is wrong with his room. However, as expected, Frank doesn't acknowledge Henry's presence, nor does he know he's behind the door, even if Henry screams and banging on the door. Although Frank uses his key to unlock Henry's apartment door, this proves to be futile as it doesn't open. Feeling hopeless, Henry is left once again with no other choice but to use the hole in his bathroom to traverse Walter's other worlds. Henry awakens to find himself inside a prison cell block, with the nearby shouting of a man locked in a jail cell. Without a moment to lose, Henry rushes to the man, calling out to him. Moments later, Henry finds a man named Andrew DeSalvo, pleading to Henry to set him free from his prison cell as he states, "He's going to kill me. Walter is going to kill me," having no sense of morals or boundaries when it came to exacting what he wanted out of selfish gain, but also to express this empowerment over those more vulnerable and fragile than him. Andrew DeSalvo would be that man. One day, he took the opportunity when given to him without hesitation. Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage would advertise the position of watchman to observe the children in the water prison. Some of these people would have no affiliation with the cults, but rather be everyday people. Andrew DeSalvo was hired to fit that role, keeping the children in check, even if it meant through violent and hostile behavior on his end. According to the Another Crimson Tomb documentation, Andrew was seen as always, or usually, drunk. And it was because of his intoxication that the children were exposed to the cruel and terrible person he truly was. He would go on to abuse the children, even if they weren't in the wrong, as it was a power move for him that he enjoyed. Because of his immoral behavior, the others, such as the children and the watchmen, called him Pig. Furthermore, Andrew's behavior stems from his lack of care of whether or not the children broke the rules, but rather enjoying abusing the children regardless. An example of Andrew's behavior is in one interaction he had with a group of kids who wanted to go outside and play in Silent Hill Woods. Andrew shouted at the kids, stating, "Hey, you punk, you want to go out and play in the forest? I don't care about the cult's teachings. You got the permission? I don't care. I'm the rule here. If you play in the forest again without my permission, you'll be sorry." The group of kids then replied to Andrew with, "Hey, we got the permission from God. Don't you know that?" Andrew, now enraged by the kids talking back, proceeded to the kids violently. After Andrew finished hitting the kids, hoping it was enough to instill fear into them and teach them a lesson, he saw one of them saying, "You don't understand the words of God. The pig will be punished by God." After meeting Andrew DeSalvo and promising to save him from his grim fate, Henry makes his way to the basement floor to collect the water prison exit key. Once collected, Henry heads to the rooftop of the water prison to shut off the water pressure system. Henry then makes his way to the third floor of the water prison to encounter a horrific, massive moss-like entity called the Twin Victim. This large creature appears to wear a black smock that is tattered and worn out, which bears a feather-like quality to his clothing texture. The smock is worn as a hood over the two conjoined twins with baby-like faces. The conjoined twins are shown to have ash-white pale skin, an enormous adult build, and long arms, which are used as a means of traversal as the creature lacks a pair of legs. The Twin Victim is seen as a very observant enemy type, as it is typically seen roaming around its environment, preying on its next victim. If Henry spotted by the Twin Victim, they will directly point at him before charging, and then lunging at him as their form of attack. If Henry happens to be close to their position, they will attack him with their arm, with a powerful swing to knock him down. If Henry successfully lands a hit to deal damage to them, they fall down incapacitated and cry and pout as if they were throwing a temper tantrum. The Twin Victims, while notably terrifying in their massive size and appearance, are, in actuality, a tragic set of twins who were, unfortunately, brutally murdered by Walter Sullivan. Their names were Miriam and Billy Locane. Around the time of the twins' murder, in an article discovered by James Sunderland in the garbage disposal of Woodside Apartments, titled Murder Incident Article, discusses the arrest of the prolific serial killer named Walter Sullivan. It was reported by the police that the tragedy took place in front of the Locane household, as the twins' corpses were discovered on their front street. Both Miriam and Billy Locane were brutally slaughtered and killed by an axe. Once deceased, Walter Sullivan removed both of their hearts respectively. Henry enters one of the prison cells to jump down the corpse disposal chute to reach the basement floor of the shower room. Henry then heads into the basement hall, proceeding up the ladder to the surveillance rooms. Once here, he must solve a puzzle by turning the valves to the correct position in the prison rooms. They're correctly aligned with the holes of the corpse disposal chute with a blood-stained bed. Once he solves the puzzle, Henry makes his way down the ladder to meet up with Andrew DeSalvo, who is now free from his captivity. Andrew is seen on his knees, pleading with the little boy not to let him die. Once the little boy leaves, Henry reconvenes with Andrew, asking him who the little boy is. Andrew reveals his name is Walter Sullivan, and that Andrew used to work at the Wish House Orphanage a long time ago, where he, at the time, happened to take care of Walter Sullivan when he was much younger. He continues to reveal that the Wish House Orphanage was, in actuality, the cover-up of the cult's religious background that they used to indoctrinate the children to brainwash them. Andrew states that Walter practiced the cult's teachings as he was fascinated by the descent of the Holy Mother ritual. Andrew then walks away, continuing to ramble in delusion. Henry ascends once again up the ladder to the 3rd floor to jump down the prison disposal chutes, descending to the basement kitchen. Once here, Henry acquires the Watchfulness placard. Once unlocking the door, Henry once again stumbles upon Andrew. However, Henry witnesses a brutal and violent sight to behold, as Andrew is seen deceased in a pool of water now consumed by his blood. On Andrew's stomach are numbers carved into a marking that says 18 out of 21. Andrew DeSalvo would become Walter's 18th victim. Henry awakens in his apartment to find that it is now sunset. While exploring his apartment, he finds that his bathroom shower is suddenly covered in blood. Henry decides to check through his peephole on his front door, finding both Eileen and Frank waiting outside Henry's apartment. Eileen asks Frank how the progress of unlocking room 302 is going so far, to which Frank replies of no success in his efforts. Frank reveals that similar incidents, much like the one happening concurrently with Henry, have happened before, admitting something is wrong with the apartment room. Although he is unsuccessful, Frank slips a note under the door in hopes of getting Henry's attention. Frank then abruptly reveals to Eileen that he keeps an umbilical cord in his apartment, much to her shock and discomfort. As they both leave, Henry finds a new bloodstained hand on the wall, now amounting to 18. With not much else to do, and to no avail in calling for help, Henry decides to re-enter the hole in his bathroom to travel through Walter's other worlds. Henry awakens to find himself in the building world, a manifestation of South Ashfield's various buildings, such as department stores, apartments, and back alleys. As he explores, Henry then encounters a humanoid, monkey-like creature called a gumhead, reeking of molted, gray skin that appears decayed. These creatures embody an amalgamation of a humanoid-like appearance and radiate the sounds of monkey-like screeching or grunting. The gumheads come in 2 variants. The old type is completely gray and seen as commons, seen with large, tumor-like growths on their neck that are exposed and stretched out, and a mutilated face that looks melted. The new types have red patches that appear as scrapes or cut marks, with a similar cancer-like growth exposed. Gumheads are depicted as having lower intelligence, as seen in both their behavior and vocalizations. They are typically seen as primitive in their mannerisms, and mimic ape-like sound in their speech. Although they may not be intelligent as other monsters, they are still a threat not to be trifled with. When attacking, the gumhead is seen as rather playful when it comes to its prey, as they're incredibly agile in their movement by using their legs to hop back and forth. Typically, they're seen either striking Henry with their arms or biting him. They are seen as much more ruthless if they procure a melee weapon. The gumhead could serve as a symbolic representation of Walter's adverse feelings towards society, and how he perceives people, presumably men, given the more masculine appearance of the gumhead, as lesser than, which is supported due to lack of intelligence and primitive-like mannerisms. Throughout much of Walter's life, his interactions with others were negative and emotionally traumatic experiences that affected him in his upbringing. These interactions with more masculine figures resulted in this form of animalistic abuse and lack of emotional empathy expressed towards a young Walter. As Henry continues throughout the building world, Henry is suddenly met with Richard Braintree as he falls stories above onto the ground below, seemingly unscathed as he seems unbothered and lacks any wounds from his fall. Suddenly, Richard asks Henry where he is as he equips and aims his revolver at him. However, Richard soon realizes his mistake as he recognizes Henry. After getting acquainted, they formally introduce themselves properly. Richard then asks Henry as to how exactly they got into this weird, freaky world, as he puts it. He then ponders that if he and Henry ended up in this other world, then something wrong must be happening to the apartment building they both live in. Richard then makes a realization, connecting the strange and mysterious disappearance of the person before Henry who lived in room 302 must have seemingly disappeared in one of Walter's other worlds. Richard then leaves Henry to himself in hopes of escaping. In his time living at South Ashfield Heights, the apartment residents attended to talk about Richard Braintree behind his back, as he was infamously known for having a short temper which led to altercations. One of the worst incidents was with another resident named Mike, who was revered as a perverted stalker, who preyed on one of the apartment residents named Rachael. One day, Mike unintentionally bumped into Richard's shoulder by accident, leading to Richard to yell at Mike. However, Richard was much moodier than usual, shouting, "Who do you think I am?" Richard's short emotional outburst got the best of him, which led to him grabbing Mike by the collar of his shirt, dragging him to his apartment of room 207. The crowd, witnessing the events unfold, would shortly follow behind. Mike would then be brutally beaten by Richard, which would see him come out completely naked, with Richard holding his shirt and jeans completely soaked in blood. Richard then shouts at Mike as he's running away, saying, "How do you like that, you sick little freak? You had it coming at you." Richard would then throw Mike's clothes to the ground in a fit of rage. As Richard looked into the crowd, Richard noticed a little boy whom he had seen before. Richard then yells at the little boy, saying, "You're snooping around again? Get out of here before you really piss me off." As Henry continues to explore the building world, Henry finds an apartment room with a ghost on the floor, incapacitated with a large sword that penetrates through his chest. This ghost is named Eric Welsh. On the day of his birthday, Eric was eagerly anticipating a special day, as he was looking forward to spending time with his family. While he was working as a bartender at Bar South Ashfield, he met a customer with whom he had an idle conversation with. As he was serving the customer told Eric about the recent murder of the pet store owner, Steve Garland, and the rest of the animals that were brutally slaughtered, warning him to tread carefully as eyewitnesses reported that the murderer was still at large. With this information in mind, Eric made sure to close the bar early and was off shift earlier than usual, due to the recent events of the murder close by. Although weary, and understandably alarmed about the murder, Eric still looked forward to spending his birthday with his family. Once Eric arrived home, a feast and cake were prepared for him, surprising him. However, it wasn't his family who were there to surprise him. Instead, it was the serial killer, Walter Sullivan, who wished him a happy birthday as he shot Eric point blank in his face with a handgun, killing him instantly. Eric Welsh would become Walter's 10th victim. Before departing from the ghost, Henry takes the ghost's key to exit the apartment. Henry eventually makes his way through several local department stores, such as the sporting goods store, to reach Garland's pet store to acquire the Albert Sports key, to then return to the sports shop to exit the store. Henry eventually reaches an elevator in which he once again meets Richard Braintree. As the elevator descends to the lower floor, he catches a glimpse of Richard, equipped with his revolver, aiming it at the young Walter. During this exchange, Richard asks the young boy if he was the kid Henry was warning him about, and, as he slowly recognizes him, asks if he was the little boy who used to hang around the apartment of room 302. Before he can get an answer, the young Walter runs away, with Richard following close behind. Amassing in quantity, appearing as a tall, slender, fungi-like creature that appears in various locations throughout Walter's other worlds. The Toadstool serves as an obstacle that blocks Henry's path in tight, linear spaces. While they do pose as a threat when blocking Henry's means of traversal, they don't oppose much of an offensive attack as they remain passive. Unless touched when making close contact, they are easily removed and defeated with either a melee weapon or a firearm. The Toadstool can be viewed as an allegory for death and rebirth. Because mushrooms operate strictly in the ground of the earth, they can be seen as representing decay and infection. As decomposers, fungi thrive on dead matter, creating new life from what has perished. Because of the everlasting presence of the Toadstool throughout Walter's other worlds, it can be symbolic of the death suffered by Walter's victims. Their presence, figuratively speaking, serves as a form of decay and infection that rots and plagues the memories manifested from his other worlds. Eventually, Henry stumbles upon Bar South Ashfield. Inside the bar, Henry finds a note on the counter, which hints that the code to the locked door can be found on an advertisement poster on top of the building opposite to South Ashfield Apartments. With this in mind, Henry travels back to the apartment to look outside his window to find the last 4-digit numbers displayed on the billboard advertisement. Upon receiving the code, Henry puts it into the keypad, unlocking the door successfully. Once done, Henry ascends the long stairwell to meet Richard Braintree. However, Henry is met with a gruesome and horrific sight of Richard getting electrocuted as a young Walter stands nearby, watching him as he dies. Although Henry tries to save Richard, his efforts prove to be futile as the shock hurts him the moment he makes contact. Simultaneously, young Walter looks outside the window to which he points at something, implying South Ashfield Heights as the next location Henry needs to go to. As Richard dies, the carved marking of 19 out of 21 is written in blood on top of his forehead. Richard Braintree is Walter's 19th victim. Henry awakens in his bedroom to find his radio emitting a frequency that tunes into a station that hears the local police discussing the recent murder of Richard Braintree. They speculate that this is connected to the Walter Sullivan case from 10 years ago. But the problem is that Walter Sullivan is dead, as they have evidence of the body. They are led to believe that there is a copycat killer impersonating these murders. Outside of Henry's window, he finds a man with blonde hair and a long coat, pointing to his neighbor's apartment in room 303. Henry is led to believe the next victim is Eileen. Worried, Henry checks in on Eileen immediately through the peephole of his wall. Thankfully, Eileen is safe as she's seen wearing a dress for a party that she mentioned earlier. Although she appears safe, Henry still feels the need to confirm his suspicions of Eileen's life at stake. Henry then enters the hole in his bathroom to awaken in the apartment world. This world is a manifestation of Walter's memories of his times visiting the apartment of room 302. However, in his other world, it's eroded in flesh and blood that pulsates, as if the apartment itself is alive. This could serve as an allegory for Walter's delusional belief that his mother is room 302 itself. Henry enters room 301 to find a note from his former next-door neighbor named Mike. Mike previously lived in South Ashfield Heights before going absent. During his time here, he was seen as a perverted stalker who was deeply infatuated with another apartment resident named Rachael. He would pester her with flowers, love letters, and invade her personal privacy. Other residents in the apartment complex caught wind of this and were disgusted or hated him. Till this day, it's unknown what became of Mike, but because he had a connection to his former next-door neighbor, Joesph Schrieber, living in room 302, his memories manifested in Walter's other world. Elsewhere in room 301, Henry finds a picture of a younger Frank Sunderland and Rachael. Taped onto the picture is the superintendent's key. Next to this is a picture of Rachael, dressed in a nurse's attire. On this photo are the words, "I love you," that are written by Mike. Before leaving room 301, Henry is met with another one of the ghosts, a middle-aged woman named Sharon Blake. Sharon was seen as self-aware and incredibly skeptical of Silent Hill, specifically the cult that ran the Wish House orphanage. As her family had lived in Silent Hill, they were indoctrinated into the cult and frequented the Silent Hill church. Although Sharon was persuaded by her family to join the cult, she denied her family's advances as she knew the true ulterior motives the cult practiced, deeming them as fraud. After some time, without hearing from her family, she began to grow worried and decided to go check on them for reassurance. Upon visiting Silent Hill, Sharon would venture into Silent Hill Woods to seek out answers from the Wish House orphanage, in hopes of getting an answer for her family's absence. Along the way, as she explores the woods, she finds a gravesite, and much to her misfortune, sees her family's gravestones. As if on cue, Sharon is inconveniently caught by Walter Sullivan as he happens to be in the area. Without receiving the chance to grieve for her family, Walter would forcefully grab Sharon, dragging her to Toluca Lake and proceeding to drown her until she died. Sharon Blake would become Walter's 13th victim. Once he collects the superintendent's key, Henry continues to search throughout the apartment world. Entering the stairwell, Henry is surprised by a man who sits atop one of the steps holding a doll. Quietly, without a hint of emotion or thought. The man who speaks to Henry is an older Walter Sullivan. Walter states that he received the doll from Eileen Galvin long ago, when she was much younger with her mother. Walter then tells Henry that he's giving the doll to him now. If Henry picks up the doll, it directly causes a haunting to be inflicted in his inventory box, which will then need to see him exorcise the haunting to cause it to subside. After his interaction with Walter, Henry proceeds to the superintendent's apartment. Inside Frank's room, he finds a box containing the umbilical cord that is Walter Sullivan's, which he kept out of empathy and remorse for his abandonment by his parents. Elsewhere in Frank's apartment, Henry finds more notes, a part of a red diary, which he mysteriously receives on consecutive visits back to room 302. Before leaving, Henry finds a key rack containing the apartment keys, which unlocks every apartment room in the apartment complex. Inside room 102, Henry finds a group of larvae, leech-like insects called Tremor. These huge leeches vary in size, are coated in slime, and slither along either the floors or walls. While the Tremor doesn't pose any particular threat, as they're easily avoidable and not necessarily a hostile enemy, they can prove to be a nuisance. If Henry were to make close contact with the Tremor, they would inflict slight damage as they burst open. Henry can easily stomp on them, which instantaneously kills them. The Tremor can be symbolic of a parasite, as they're first witnessed in the water prison world, and then afterwards appear in every single one of Walter's other worlds soon after. It's possible that the memories of Walter's parents that were seen from the perspective of the other apartment residents, such as Frank Sunderland, internalized their thoughts about the abandonment of Walter, perceiving him as a form of a parasite that would leech onto his parents, more specifically, his mother. After disposing the Tremors, Henry finds a deceased cat inside a fridge, alongside another red paper. Henry then enters room 106 to find a nurse's uniform that belonged to Rachael. Rachael was a nurse who lived in South Ashfield Heights and had a friendship with Frank Sunderland. It's speculated that Rachael, due to her position as a nurse, worked in St. Jerome Hospital, located nearby in South Ashfield. Rachael was previously a name that was mentioned by Laura, a character in Silent Hill 2, who took care of both her and Mary Shepard Sunderland while in the hospital. It's possible that Rachael's connection to Frank led to Frank asking Rachael for a favor, personally asking her to be the caretaker for Mary while she was terminally ill. While exploring the second floor, Henry enters room 203 to find the next and final red paper. Once all the red papers are collected, Henry returns to room 302 to place all the red papers under his apartment door, to then read all of them upon returning. As Henry returns to room 302, the note of particular importance is Red Diary Scrap Continued. In this memo, Henry reads a message that depicts the person, Joesph Schrieber, having a bad headache and resting in his bed all day. Joesph implies that he will need something by the side of his bed. Henry then checks the side of his bed in his bedroom to find a doll key that is for room 303. With the doll key collected, Henry travels back to the apartment world to unlock room 303. Inside, he finds a gruesome sight as he sees Eileen heavily wounded as she lies on the floor, panting. On Eileen's back are marked numbers which read 20 out of 21. Before she faints, Eileen asks young Walter if he has found his mom, telling him to leave before he is next. Henry, led to believe that Eileen has died, falls to his knees. Eileen would become Walter's 20th victim. As Henry awakens once again in his bedroom, he hears the sounds of an ambulance nearby. As he looks outside his window, he finds the ambulance leaving moments later, which he believes is for Eileen. At his front door, Henry finds a tarot card called the Succubus Talisman. Inside his laundry room, Henry finds a marked carving into his wall, leading him to believe the Succubus Talisman needs to be placed there. Once placed, Henry then uses the 4 placards he previously collected on the wall surrounding the talisman. Once these items have been placed, a hole emerges from the wall. Because the hole in his bathroom wall is completely sealed, Henry compromises with a newly made hole in his laundry room to continue his travels between Walter's other worlds. Worried about Eileen as she lies scattered in his thoughts, Henry once again ventures into the horrors of the unknown. Behind the curtain reveals Walter Sullivan, using his hands to dig into a stomach of a woman's corpse. As Walter takes notice of Henry, he smiles sadistically without speaking a single word, scaring Henry into running outside into the hallway. In a room nearby, Henry witnesses a board that charts messages, photographs, and a study of Eileen Galvin, presumably from Walter. This leads Henry to believe and hope that Eileen is possibly still alive somewhere in the hospital world. As Henry continues his search for Eileen on the second floor of the hospital world, he stumbles upon ghostly apparitions controlling inanimate, sentient wheelchairs. The wheelchair is a possessed object that is controlled by a translucent ghost. While simplistic in nature, compared to the more formidable ghosts or monsters seen previously, the wheelchair is just as competent in proving to be a threat to Henry. It's very agile when it comes to momentum, never stopping and moving up and down in an orderly fashion while breaking its movement cycle. If Henry were to make contact with a wheelchair, it would see him get knocked down and stunned briefly. Because of their ghostly presence, they function similarly to the ghost enemies who cannot be killed and thus are invulnerable. The wheelchairs could be symbolic of Walter's disdain for hospitals. It also could be a manifestation of Walter's memories in the hospital when he was previously taken care of as a baby by the hospital staff during that time in his life, before shortly being adopted by Silent Hill Welsh orphanage. As Henry checks the multiple rooms on the second floor of the hospital world, he stumbles upon a room with an abrupt and haunting sign of a massive Eileen Head. The mysterious and ambiguous nature of the Eileen Head is left up to interpretation as to what it could directly symbolize, but it could be seen as a mocking caricature of Henry's observations of Eileen. While his intentions are pure, as he genuinely cares about her, one can interpret his actions as unjust, as it is seen as an invasion of privacy, since she doesn't know of Henry's actions, which, without context, can be deemed as ulterior in his motives and give off the wrong intentions. Henry's observations can be seen elsewhere, such as his front door when looking into the peephole, the watchtower that peers into the children's cell rooms, or looking outside his window into the outside world that goes on without him, of South Ashfield. These observations are manifested into personifying those actions of Henry and completely reversing it onto him, projected by the aforementioned Eileen Head. Massive in its size, and particularly the jittery eyes that follow and watch Henry as he moves around the room. Shortly after, Henry enters a room that contains the hospital room key. Once acquired, he unlocks the room containing Eileen, which sees Eileen passed out from her injuries, but thankfully still alive. As Eileen wakes up, she screams in a panic, which sees Henry trying to console her. Recognizing Henry and becomes more at ease. Once calm, Eileen asks Henry what is going on. Henry explains to Eileen that one day he witnessed a hole appear in his bathroom, which he used to travel to these other worlds. where there, he saw other people getting killed. Henry states that he last saw Eileen getting attacked and presumed that she died. Initially, Eileen scoffs and finds it difficult to believe Henry's story, but Henry reassures her that what they're experiencing is real. Eileen, after some thought, remembers that she was getting ready to go to her friend's party, but soon after met a little boy, young Walter, who protected her from a man in a coat, the older Walter Sullivan. Eileen apologizes to Henry for not believing him previously. Henry then tells Eileen that he does know that if they were to die in this other world, they would die in the real world. Henry explains that if they want to escape the hospital world, they need to exit through the hole he came through to travel back to his apartment. Agreeing, they both make their way to the hole to escape. When she was much younger, about 18 years ago, a young, 5-year-old Eileen Galvin, walking with her mother in the streets of South Ashfield, happened to pass by a homeless man lying in a withered sleeping bag. Eileen's mother whispers to Eileen to not look at him and to keep walking away without making contact. However, Eileen asks her mother why, and she decides to then approach the homeless man lying down in the street. Eileen continues to ask the homeless man why he's lying down in the street and if he's cold sleeping here. The man, looking puzzled, is shocked that she is talking to him. Her mother grows immediately worried in response to Eileen by shouting at her not to continue to talk to him. However, the innocent and young, empathetic Eileen tells her mother why she can't see that he is cold and sad. Eileen then takes out of her bag her doll and gives it to the homeless man. Eileen tells him that he can keep it and he can sleep with the doll so it can keep him warm and give him company so he doesn't have to be alone anymore. After Eileen gives the homeless man the doll, her mother tells her that they need to go home as it's her dad's birthday today and they wouldn't want to be late to celebrate his special day. As they leave, Eileen tells the homeless man goodbye. The homeless man is seen looking at Eileen and her mother as he holds the doll tightly. To him, he sees that they look so happy and is in disbelief at the young Eileen's act of kindness. He then starts to cry profusely and continues to cry for a long time. As they are walking away, Eileen asks her mother if the homeless man will like the doll that she gave him, to which her mother responds that he will love it because she gave it to him. The homeless man was Walter Sullivan. As Henry and Eileen continue to escape the hospital world, they encounter, at the end of the long hallway on the second floor, a group of monsters called the Patient. This tall, grotesque, humanoid monster resembles that of a decayed corpse wearing a hospital gown, with molted, grey ashy skin, along with chunks of its flesh missing throughout its body. The Patient moves very menacingly as it walks toward Henry, and, once in close contact, continuously swings its melee weapon in a motion that never ends. While opposing in size, they can easily be taken down with a firearm or a perfectly timed swing. The Patient could be symbolic of Walter's mother, specifically the allegory of childbirth. Walter is seen previously removing not only the Patient's stomach but also her uterus. As a result, the Patient emits a loud, burping sound due to the extraction of these bodily functions. This could allude to Walter, metaphorically speaking, wanting to be reborn inside of his mother's womb. After some time, Henry and Eileen finally reach the hole. As Henry reassures Eileen by holding her hand as he enters the hole, he travels back to his apartment to awaken on his bed to realize that Eileen is gone. As Henry lies in his bed confused, he suddenly hears a loud crash in his living room. Worried, he checks his living room to see that the ceiling fan has fallen on the ground. Henry begins to feel a heavy and negative energy in the room. At the front door, Henry receives a letter from the man he has previously been receiving letters from, named Joesph Schrieber. Joesph gives Henry a small key and tells him that he'll need to go deeper into Walter's other worlds to find the hidden truth. Henry then travels back to the hospital world to meet with Eileen once again. Eileen, happy to see Henry, rushes to him to hug him tightly. Henry then asks Eileen if she's been here the whole time since he left, which she confirms, telling him that she didn't see a hole and he disappeared. Eileen tells Henry that he can't leave her alone as she's afraid that she'll become cursed, due to her being Walter's 20th victim. Henry reassures Eileen that he knows a way to save her. Henry tells Eileen that if she knew of someone named Joesph Schrieber, to which she confirms that she did. Eileen reveals that Joesph was the previous occupant who used to live in room 302 before Henry moved in. Eileen mentions that Joesph was a journalist, but she doesn't know much else. She remembers that Joesph disappeared 6 months before Henry moved into room 302. Henry comments on Joseph's disappearance by telling Eileen that he was originally investigating a religious cult, the Order, and a serial killer named Walter Sullivan. Henry states that to get rid of Eileen's curse, and to put an end to the supernatural force that is the other worlds from Walter Sullivan, they must reach the deepest part of Walter's subconscious and reach the ultimate truth. Eileen agrees and sticks with Henry to see this through. As Henry and Eileen leave the room, they both reach the elevator. Henry uses the small key he received from Joesph. using it to exit the hospital world and enter Walter's other worlds. Inside is a spiral staircase that scales from the highest platform to the lowest platform. As Henry and Eileen descend the staircase, he makes a quick detour into room 302. Once inside, Henry witnesses room 302 becoming consumed by the paranormal, presenting an oppressive and hostile atmosphere. These are known as hauntings. Hauntings see various parts of room 302 become engulfed by various negative and dark forces that inflict damage upon Henry. To dispose of these threats, Henry must use either a candle to place down directly in front of the haunted anomaly, or equip the same medallion and stand idle next to it. After some time, these items will expel the haunting, returning the inanimate object back to its normal state. However, if these haunted anomalies are left undone, this will not only affect Henry's health, but also dictate the outcome of the ending. As Henry returns to the spiral staircase to meet up with Eileen, they head downwards to a door that leads them into the subway world. Both Henry and Eileen navigate the subway station to head towards the subway turnstile to enter Lynch Street platform. However, before they can enter, Henry is met with a ghost that is manifested from the corpse of Cynthia Velasquez, called Victim 16. Much like the previous ghost encountered, Victim 16 functions similarly. However, she is defined as a new type. Victim 16 will use her long black hair to tangle and trap Henry, becoming susceptible to taking damage, impaling Henry by reaching into his body to grab his heart. While avoidable and optional, it's best to dispose of these new types as they can be re-encountered on a consecutive basis, making progression harder. To dispose of Victim 16, much like the previous ghosts, it's best to use the Sword of Obedience to incapacitate her effectively. Nearby, Henry encounters the next monster called the Greedy Worm. This colossal behemoth is a large, slimy worm that is seen protruding out of the walls. These worm-like creatures are unkillable, but interestingly, can take damage. Although they aren't remotely depicted as a threat or dangerous, they are still a manifestation of Walter's other worlds, as it can be seen in various locations, enacting similar behavior. The Greedy Worm may be symbolic of serving as the connection as a primary link between the various other worlds manifested by Walter Sullivan. After this encounter, Henry and Eileen traverse the linear halls of the maze-like subway cars to reach one of the rooms on the opposite side. Once they reach the room with a hole in the wall, Henry descends the ladder, but due to Eileen's injuries, she's incapable of following him, leaving her stationary. Because of this, Henry must leave Eileen in safe rooms to prevent her from getting attacked by the monsters or ghost, as over time progressively curse her. Henry must then travel back to his apartment to reach his front door to receive the toy key. Once acquired, Henry travels back to the subway world to use the toy key on the toy chest, receiving the filthy coin. Henry must then again travel back to room 302 to wash the filthy coin. Once he washes the coin reveals a strange symbol with a $1 sign. This symbol refers to the vending machine, which also has the $1 sign symbol. Once returning to the subway world, Henry uses the coin on the vending machine, receiving the murder scene key. Henry continues to traverse the subway world, finding himself on the opposite end of the turnstile platform on King Street. Once here, he finds Cynthia's commuter ticket, allowing him to go between both turnstiles freely. With the murder scene key, he unlocks the room where Cynthia was murdered. In the room, he finds the train handle. With the train handle, Henry reconvenes with Eileen, and they both return to the King Street subway platform to enter one of the subway cars to use the train handle. In doing so, the subway car reveals a hidden passageway, allowing both Henry and Eileen to escape the subway world. Before exiting, they are surprised by Walter Sullivan, who is now hunting them down to stop them from progressing any further, becoming a stalker-type enemy that will be encountered on a consecutive basis that cannot be killed. As Henry and Eileen escape Walter, they descend the spiral staircase to reach the forest world. In the cemetery, Henry equips himself with a torch, which he will need to illuminate the dark wells scattered across Silent Hill Woods, to receive 5 missing mannequin doll parts for the burned doll puzzle. In their path to collect these 5 missing mannequin doll parts, Henry once again meets young Walter at the lookout point of Toluca Lake. In this exchange, Henry asks the young Walter if he is Walter Sullivan. The young Walter reveals that it is his name, as that is what everyone calls him, but to him, he doesn't have a real name. Henry asks if he has a mom or dad, to which he replies that his mom and dad abandoned him when he was a baby. However, young Walter reassures Henry that he will meet his mom soon, which he believes is room 302 itself. Walter states that according to the scriptures, if he were to complete the 21 Sacraments ritual, this would allow him to finally be with his mother again. After young Walter runs away, Henry finds the crested medallion. Elsewhere in Silent Hill Woods, Henry and Eileen eventually encounter Victim 17, the ghost of Jasper Gein. Victim 17 is depicted on fire, alluding to Jasper's cause of death through immolation. His body is seen as charred, mutilated, and constantly burning on fire. His attacks can be deadly as he uses the candlestick to inflict damage upon Henry, while simultaneously grappling with him. Much like Victim 16, Victim 17 is a formidable threat that can be a hindrance much later if not dealt with upon first encounter. It's best that Henry uses the same medallion, silver bullet, or candle to exercise the demonic energy, to then use the Sword of Obedience to pin down Victim 17, incapacitating him for good. Once Henry and Eileen acquire all 5 missing mannequin doll parts, Henry inserts them into the burnt mannequin doll in the wheelchair. Once done, the doll rolls off the platform, revealing a hidden trapdoor that ascends into a secret altar, which sees the cult's insignia, the Hail of the Sun symbol. Lying on the altar is a scripture, the Descent of the Holy Mother, the 21 Sacraments. According to the ancient black arts and dark practices foretold by the Order, the mythology surrounding the 21 Sacraments refers to a ritualistic ceremony, specifically within the Holy Mother sector. This prophesizes that if the ritual were to be completed, the Mother shall be reborn, and the nation of sin shall be redeemed. For this ritual to begin, the host would have to conduct a specific performance of conducting 21 sacrifices. These sacrifices would have to be performed in 3 phases. The first phase, referred to as the 10 Hearts, needs to see 10 people sacrificed with their hearts extracted and a carved number on their bodies. The second phase, the Holy Assumption, sees the host needing to commit ritualistic suicide as a means to become a ghost, to continue conducting the rest of the sacrifices in this apparition form. As a result, the host would become the 11th sacrifice. The third and final phase would see the last of the 10 sacrifices apply themes such as temptation, source, watchfulness, and chaos. This would allude to such people as Cynthia Velasquez, Jasper Gein, Andrew DeSalvo, and Richard Braintree. After inserting the crest medallion into the plate on the door, Henry and Eileen find themselves once again descending the spiral staircase to reach the water prison world. Once they arrive, they both head downward to the 3rd floor cell block, reaching the prison cell with a bloodstained bed for Henry to jump down the hole to reach the basement floor. Once on the basement floor, Henry enters the room where Andrew DeSalvo was last seen murdered, where he finds a prisoner's shirt. With the prisoner's shirt, Henry must return to his apartment to coat the prisoner's shirt in his bathtub filled with blood. Once this is done, the bloody, soaked shirt reveals a hidden message telling Henry that someone left the Sword of Obedience under their bed on the 2nd floor cell block, stating that they plan to use this and implant it into the pig, referring to Andrew DeSalvo, who has the basement key. Henry then returns to the water prison world and ascends to the 2nd floor cell block to collect the Sword of Obedience. Once done, he regroups with Eileen to descend further to the basement floor. As they further their descent, they come face to face with Victim 18, the ghost form of Andrew DeSalvo. Much like the prior new type of ghost, Victim 18 has its unique set of perks that can be seen as imposing. Victim 18 sustains the ability to use his entire body to convert himself into a barrel roll to launch himself at Henry, dealing lots of damage. Along with his attack, Victim 18 has a strong aura that negatively affects Henry's Saint Medallion, depleting it much faster. Unlike the previous victims, Victim 18 is much tougher to defeat as it requires an elaborate effort to effectively incapacitate him for good. To do so, Henry must use a handgun and insert the silver bullet to fire at Victim 18, causing him to become stunned briefly. Moments later, Henry would need to use the Sword of Obedience to effectively defeat Victim 18. Once Victim 18 is defeated, Henry acquires the basement key. With the basement key, Henry and Eileen both exit the water prison world. Once again, they descend the spiral staircase to reach the building world. Upon arrival, they are immediately met with Victim 19, the ghost of Richard Braintree. The final set of new type ghost, Victim 19, encompasses unique abilities that are similar to those of the previous new type ghosts met previously. Due to his death by electrocution, Richard's body movements emulate those of the sporadic movements of someone getting shocked, resulting in their body convulsing violently. This is depicted in his ghost form, as much of his movement is erratic as he swings his crowbar violently in a glitch-like momentum. His movement is extremely unpredictable, as Victim 19 can be seen moving in slow motion while moving forward, but simultaneously moving backwards in a sudden, fast motion. Furthermore, the movement is not only specific to Richard walking in an unstable motion, but could also seem to possess the ability to teleport in close proximity, as well as phase through inanimate objects if his victim chooses to run away from him. While in the building world, Henry and Eileen must traverse through the linear and tightly connected buildings to collect 4 pieces that belong to past victims of Walter Sullivan, which need to be returned to their respective origin. These 4 pieces are the cake candles, billiard ball, stuffed cat, and volleyball. The cake candles need to be placed in the birthday cake in Eric Welsh's apartment. The billiard ball needs to be placed on the pool table in bar South Ashfield. The stuffed cat needs to be placed in a cage in Garland's pet shop. Finally, the volleyball needs to be placed in a basket in Albert's Sporting Goods. Once all these 4 items are returned to respective places of origin, Henry and Eileen must return to the basement floor of South Ashfield. Before arriving, Henry comes across another ghost named Peter Wells. Peter Wells was a high school student who was known to indulge in smoking marijuana, seen amongst his peers as an addict. One day, Peter was smoking marijuana in a secluded alleyway across from one of the streets in South Ashfield. It was rumored that he bought marijuana off of Toby Archbolt, the priest who worked for the order. While with his friends in the alleyway, Peter noticed the ladder and decided to be devious and climbed the ladder to amuse his friends with his antics. However, as Peter reached the top of the ladder, he was nowhere to be found, as he mysteriously vanished moments later. It was later found that he was brutally beaten to death in a hotel room in South Ashfield Hotel. The murderer was Walter Sullivan. Peter Wells would become the 12th victim of Walter Sullivan. After his encounter, Henry and Eileen arrive at bar South Ashfield. Once here, Henry must input a new code to lock the door to exit to the stairwell. To retrieve the new code, Henry must return to his apartment and answer the telephone, which relays a code for the door to unlock. Once completed, Henry and Eileen make their final descent down to the bottom floor to reach the one truth. As Henry and Eileen reach the room, they bear witness to a spectacle of numerous massive, wall-mounted creatures that lie resting above them, descending downward and, in conjunction, ascending upward in this continuous motion. These monsters would be deemed as the One Truth. The One Truth, much like the Wallman, appears to protrude out of the wall that is attached to a metal frame, with its flesh stretched outwards as it's attached to each corner of the frame. Due to the One Truth's ability to scale up and down, it is agile in evading Henry and Eileen's attacks. To make his attacks count, Henry would have to charge his melee weapon as he stands in front of the One Truth of his choosing, and have to time his swing to accurately hit the monster, causing it to be stunned once hit. In doing so, upon complete succession of these melee swings, once defeated, the One Truth will ascend upwards. However, the monster will respawn after some time. To properly defeat the One Truth, Henry needs to find the One Truth as the name implies, and once dealt damage, the True One will be revealed, as once it is hit, the rest of the monsters will also receive damage. The One Truth can be a symbolic representation in the literal and figurative sense of the truth behind the 21 Sacraments, and the role Walter Sullivan plays in orchestrating his master plan. Henry is depicted as a receiver of wisdom, acknowledging that he values perspective in seeing others' thoughts and wanting to help them, driven by empathy and his care for other people. The battle against the One Truth could serve as a test in seeing if Henry is worthy of embodying this role. This also could be a test by Joesph Schrieber, testing Henry to see if he has what it takes to defeat Walter Sullivan. Once the One Truth is defeated, Henry and Eileen make their final descent down the spiral staircase of Walter's other worlds till they reach the final door, room 302. Once they enter, they find a drastic change in the apartment's environment, as it portrays black and white imagery, representing the past before Henry moved into room 302. Around the apartment lie various candles lit, expelling the hauntings that plague the apartment. Inside the bedroom shows a typewriter and scattered red papers. Here, we see the final memos written by Joesph Schrieber, the previous occupant who lived in room 302. In these red papers, Joesph is seen writing frantically and shows warning signs of mental decline due to the paranormal hauntings in room 302. Shortly after, Henry and Eileen re-enter the living room, where they finally meet Joesph Schrieber. Joesph reveals that he was the one who was writing Henry the notes from his red diary. The red papers Henry has come to collect throughout the story, with the intention of warning Henry of the imminent threat Walter Sullivan truly is. Joesph continues to reveal that Walter Sullivan was born in room 302 by his mother, but after his birth, both his mother and father left him abandoned. Walter would then be adopted into Wish House Orphanage, and through the teachings and practices of the cults, it brainwashed him into believing that Joseph's apartment was his actual mother, and what Walter believed was freeing his mother. He would be indoctrinated into the ritualistic ceremony called the Holy Assumption. This allowed Walter full control of creating his other worlds. Although Walter is dead, his ghost still continues to thrive, slaughtering more of his victims for the 21 Sacraments ritual to finally be complete. To finally complete this ritual, Walter only needs 2 more individuals for the sacrifice: the Mother Reborn, Eileen Galvin, and the Receiver of Wisdom, Henry Townshend. Joesph implores both Henry and Eileen that they must end Walter's means to complete the ritual by killing him. Before vanishing, he tells Henry to read the Crimson Tomb, which will tell him how to put an end to the ritual once and for all. Before the events of Silent Hill 4, Joesph Schrieber, a freelance investigative journalist, conducted much of his work on an expose to reveal the true ulterior intentions of Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage. Through his research, Joesph uncovered that the Wish House Orphanage was a cover-up to masquerade the illegal operations conducted by the underground religious cult, the Order. In his findings, he discovered that the cult would force their religious practices and values onto the youth that were taken in, abusing the children regardless of whether they refused or willingly listened and worshipped their sermons and religion. Around this time, Walter Sullivan happened to be one of those kids who was adopted into the Wish House Orphanage. A man by the name of George Roston, a priest who worked under the Valtiel sector, would, in secret, instruct Walter of the 21 Sacraments ritual. It was speculated that this allowed Valtiel to manifest in Walter's unconsciousness to control him. This, ironically, would backfire, as Walter would beat George to death with his own teachings that would see him become the 6th victim of the 21 Sacraments ritual. With this indoctrination instilled into a young Walter, who was fully taken advantage of through emotionally manipulating him into believing he could resurrect and rebirth his mother to be with her, served as the catalyst for Joesph Schrieber to investigate Walter Sullivan's murders. In the years to follow, Joesph would keep a timeline of the murders committed by Walter Sullivan in his Red Diary. This Red Diary would serve as the fundamental document that would go into further elaboration about the Walter Sullivan murder case, and how the 21 Sacraments ritual was connected to the Order. One day, Joesph would find himself completely locked in room 302. Joesph would soon come to realize that this case is not just out of the ordinary, but of the supernatural. Joesph would be led to believe that because Walter Sullivan, post-mortem, still unexplainably committed these murders 2 years after his death, that he is still somehow plotting and committing these murders as a ghost. At some point, this was too much to bear for Joesph, as he could feel the overwhelming power of Walter's dark and negative energy seep into room 302, corrupting and haunting it, slowly driving him insane. Joesph would chronicle his remaining days as he grew scared and feared of potentially being targeted as Walter's next victim. Joesph would continue to experience headaches and chest pains, witness the murders conducted by Walter as he traveled between the portals of Walter's other worlds, gathering the remaining information he knows to summarize a coherent timeline of the Walter Sullivan case, and finally, create a contingency, charting all the resources someone can use in case they happen to be succumb to a similar position as Joesph is in. Unfortunately, fate would catch up to him, and ultimately, Joesph would succumb to becoming the 15th victim of the 21 Sacraments ritual. Elsewhere, in room 302 of the past, Henry reads the document Crimson Tomb, which goes into detail how to stop the 21 Sacraments ritual. In this memo, it states to stop the ritual, one must pierce the conjurer's mother's flesh with 8 spears into the conjurer's true body. In doing so, this would ultimately kill the conjurer and his mother, referring to the rebirth of Walter Sullivan's mother and Walter Sullivan himself. Before Henry leaves room 302 of the past, he acquires the Pickaxe of Hope. Henry returns to room 302, using the Pickaxe of Hope on the wall of his hallway near his bedroom and the bathroom. As the wall collapses, Henry witnesses the corpse of Walter Sullivan left in secret in a storage room. Walter's body is seen tied up to a crucifixion, tethered and punctured by wires. Nearby rests an altar. On the altar are items needed to perform the ritual, which include an obsidian goblet, candles, white chrism, and the book titled The Holy Assumption. This ritual would instruct Walter, with a preconceived notion of the 10 previous murders already completed, that once he has acquired the 10 hearts from the previous 10 sacrifices, he would need to commit a ritualistic suicide, becoming the 11th victim. In completing the ritual of the Holy Assumption, he is reborn as a ghost, allowing him to further complete the 21 Sacraments ritual without repercussions. Born into a world unwanted and unloved by his parents, saw the tragic fate of an infant named Walter Sullivan, tossed aside and left by himself. His father complained and yelled toward his wife with phrases such as "stupid little crybaby" and "shut the hell up. You can't blame it all on me." Over the birth of Walter, his mother was left quiet as she never once spoke about his name or how she felt toward her son, regardless of her feelings, whether they were mutual or not. The wife willingly left with her husband, leaving the infant alone in their apartment of room 302. Not too long after, the superintendent of South Ashfield Heights, Frank Sunderland, noticed a loud, audible, sad cry of a baby screeching across the hall. Curious and concerned, Frank heads to room 302, only to stumble upon the shocking sight of a newly born infant. Frank was left speechless as to why his parents abandoned him. It was speculated that they got into financial issues or were in serious debt, owing loans to bad people, which saw them on the run. Whatever the definite reason is unknown, but what is known is that Frank would carry the young infant and give him to the nearby St. Jerome Hospital. Frank would keep Walter's umbilical cord, as he saw this as too precious to throw away, keeping the item for many years. Walter would become a ward at the hospital and eventually be set up for adoption. He would be adopted by the Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage. It was here, during his upbringing, that Walter would receive his formal name and would become enlightened by the teachings of the cults, the Order. If Walter were to misbehave, he would, much like the other children, be sent to the water prison, a cylindrical prison located in a sea of surrounding water in the heart of Toluca Lake. It was here that Walter, unfortunately, crossed paths with a heartless and inhumane man named Andrew DeSalvo, who would take pleasure in physically abusing the children. One altercation saw the young Walter and his friend, Bob, see Andrew one day either kill Bob or make him disappear, as Bob is never heard or seen from again. To make matters worse, Andrew would force Walter to drink water with leeches in it, traumatizing the poor child. When Walter was 6 years old, he learned how to read and write, and he began to keep a diary. At the time, the priestess of the cult, Dahlia Gillespie, was said to emotionally manipulate the young, gullible, innocent Walter about how his mother was asleep, and if he were to read the 21 Sacraments, he could potentially meet her one day. Walter, believing Dahlia's words, would take this to heart. However, he would misinterpret her message and instead believe that his mother is not inside room 302, but is room 302 itself. With this preconceived notion, Walter would travel every single week to South Ashfield Heights in hopes of one day seeing his mother. Much to his misfortune, Walter would find that room 302 was occupied by a resident, forcing him to meander and wait outside, hoping one day he'd finally get to meet his mother. For many years, Walter would travel to South Ashfield Heights just to wait and lurk around room 302. This would see the surrounding residences of the apartment complex come to know the child's presence. The tenants would begin to complain due to Walter's obsessive antics and behavior, causing one of the tenants, Richard Braintree, to complain and ridicule the child whenever he noticed him by room 302. Walter would see the residents of South Ashfield Heights as an obstacle, preventing him from seeing his mother. Because of this, he would eventually stop coming to room 302. At some point during his stay at the Wish House Orphanage, Walter would be secretly taught by one of the priest members of the Valtiel sector, George Roston. George would secretly instruct Walter on the 21 Sacraments ritual, and in doing this would let Valtiel, the sector's angel, live inside of his unconscious. Walter would receive the nickname the Red Devil. Walter would grow up to practice the occult-like teachings of the 21 Sacraments, plotting one day to seek out this master plan. At some point, Walter would eventually leave the Silent Hill Wish House Orphanage and become homeless, living amongst the city streets of South Ashfield, as he had no source of income to pay for basic living necessities, such as food, clothes, or a home. One day, Walter would encounter a young girl named Eileen Galvin. Out of the kindness of her heart, she would console him by giving him her doll, in hopes that he could sleep warmly with the company of the doll, and not have to be sad because the doll would be his friend. This exchange would make Walter cry uncontrollably, as Eileen would possibly be the only person in his life who showed him true, genuine, emotional empathy and care. During his time still homeless, Walter would be seen frequently sleeping in a tattered and withered sleeping bag at the South Ashfield station, begging for spare change from the common folk, in hopes of surviving another day. It's here where he would formally introduce himself to a young Cynthia Velasquez, although he would previously know of her, as throughout the years he would see her from afar, frequenting the station with her school friends. In this encounter, Cynthia would grow disgusted and creeped out by him, due to his disgusting smell and his revealing that he had been watching her for over a decade without her knowing. Once Walter turned 18 years old, he eventually moved to Pleasant River to study at the University of Pleasant River as a college student. For a while, Walter lived a seemingly normal life. However, the thoughts lingered in his subconscious about the inevitability of his mother being reborn and his chance of getting to meet her. With these internalized thoughts grew bitterness and resentment toward the world for those who wronged him. Walter would eventually snap and realize his true purpose, accepting what he must do: complete the Descent of the Holy Mother, 21 Sacraments ritual, at the age of 24. Walter would then orchestrate his first round of sacrifices. According to the scripture, Walter would need to murder and sacrifice 10 victims and extract their hearts, which would coincide with the 10 hearts theme of the ritualistic performance. Walter would seek out his victims and ultimately successfully murder 10 of these people, removing their hearts. Interestingly, Walter would make no effort to strategically cover his tracks, as the police would eventually catch on to his murders. These group of murders would be renowned as the Walter Sullivan case, which would be infamously spread across the world. After the murders of Miriam and Billy Locane, Walter would be apprehended for the murders of the Locane twins. Once in prison, Walter took a spoon and stabbed himself in the neck, committing suicide inside his prison cell. However, from the reports from an investigative journalist, Joesph Schrieber, he believed that this Walter Sullivan was a fake, speculating that the police falsely incarcerated a proxy that was impersonating Walter Sullivan, while the real Walter Sullivan was still roaming out freely. A few days after the Walter Sullivan case was considered solved, witnesses from South Ashfield Heights reported a long blonde-haired man with a coat walking inside the hallways of the apartment complex. Richard Braintree noticed the man moving a large, inanimate object into room 302. Walter would enter room 302 and use the storage room to perform the second phase of the 21 Sacraments ritual, the Holy Assumption. This required Walter to perform a ritualistic suicide, which would see him released from the bonds of the flesh and gain the power from heaven. Walter would become the 11th sacrament. Once he died, he gained the supernatural ability to be reborn as a ghostly apparition and create other worlds to capture his next 10 victims without consequences. Walter would then commence the final phase of the 21 Sacraments ritual. Upon discovering Walter's corpse, Henry acquires the Keys of Liberation. This would finally allow Henry to unlock the door of room 302, letting him finally escape the apartment. However, once he is outside of room 302, he stumbles upon the otherworld version of the apartment world. Nearby, he sees Eileen. Henry and Eileen venture into the corrupted amalgamation of Walter's subconscious thoughts of the memories of his experience in South Ashfield Heights. In room 301, Henry then encounters the Bottom, a horribly disfigured face with a cancerous-like body protruding mass of flesh. The Bottom bears similarities of the Gumhead in appearance, but also the twin victim in its size. Much like the twin victim, they exude the same behavior, standing stationary unless witnessed by Henry and provoked enough to where they will point at him and immediately chase him down, to then lunge at him or swipe their arms to attack him. They are seen as stronger variants of the twin victim, as they have higher durability and their health and strength. The Bottom could be a manifestation of Walter's disdain for his parents' abandonment of him at birth. From the design, the Bottom shows a head popping out of the bottom of its lower body, which could be symbolic of Walter being born, while the top of the body sees two conjoined heads, which could represent his parents. This decayed, cancerous, and disgusting version could be his internalized thoughts of his parents now that he is older and has time to reflect on his birth. After navigating the apartment rooms, Henry and Eileen reach the main lobby. While here, Eileen decides to stay and wait for Henry. Henry then explores the first floor east wing, where he finds 6 corpses of Walter Sullivan. As Henry interacts with each individual corpse, he hears echoes of the past, of Walter's father arguing with his wife about his regrets over Walter's birth, such as his hatred over the newborn infant, blaming his wife, and finally, telling his wife that they need to hurry and leave before they are caught by the superintendent. Once Henry collects these mementos from Walter's past, he reconvenes with Eileen in the main lobby. Henry finds Eileen holding a scrapbook tightly as she laments about Walter's memories seeping into her mind, empathizing about his tragic upbringing. Eileen tells Henry that they need to help the young Walter. Once they both reach the superintendent's room, they find the box containing the umbilical cord. As Henry opens the box, he gets grueling headaches of flashbacks of the very moment Walter was abandoned by his parents. As Eileen tries to console Henry, she hears a loud, ear-piercing sound that compels her to return to room 302. Eileen tells Henry that they're the only ones who can stop Walter, which sees Henry acquire the umbilical cord before also returning to room 302. Once back in room 302, Henry returns to the storage room to find Walter's corpse completely gone. However, below the crucifixion is an ominous black hole that leads to another dimension. As Henry enters, he finds himself in a room with various sculptures depicting bodies hung on the walls. Henry then finds another hole that he jumps down into. Henry finds himself in a large arena with a death machine located in the center, filled with a pool of blood. Nearby is a monstrous, humanoid creature draped in gray, rotten flesh, concealing its body as it cries in pain. This creature, referred to as the Conjurer, is the true version of Walter. Elsewhere in the arena, Walter's ghost is seen looking intently at Henry, with bloodlust in his eyes, as Henry comes face to face with Walter, where he also sees Eileen standing idle on a platform. In front of her is the aforementioned death machine, which she is possessed and forced to walk into due to Walter's influence. A young Walter is heard shouting his mom's name as he stands outside room 302. Walter reassures young Walter that he only needs to wait a little longer until the Twin One Sacraments ritual is completed. Walter tells Henry that he is the last of the Twin One Sacraments, the receiver of wisdom. As the final battle begins, Henry must kill both Walter and the true Walter before Eileen is killed by the death machine. Henry must use the umbilical cord to make the true Walter vulnerable, to then collect 8 of the spears and punch them into the true Walter. Once done, this makes Walter susceptible to any physical attacks on Henry's behalf. As Henry evens the playing field and battles it out with Walter, he finally kills Walter. As Walter falls on his back defeated, he slowly reaches out his hand, calling his mom one final time before he dies. Subsequently, the true Walter dies, and finally, the young Walter dies as he falls to the ground, disappearing. Afterward, Henry finally escapes from room 302 as he is seen walking away from South Ashfield Heights, exhausted as he limps to the city streets. As he ponders about Eileen, one day later, Henry is seen visiting Eileen at St. Jerome Hospital, giving her flowers. Eileen smiles and scoffs at Henry, jokingly saying that she'll have to find a new place to live. Henry smiles and nods in agreement as they both look at each other happily.